if you don't have a degree, you can't homeschool in KwaZulu-Natal. That's the shocking news from yesterday's Joint Liaison Committee meeting in KwaZulu-Natal. Join me, Christopher Cordero, today, wearing my LearnFree hat, along with the representatives from the Pestalozzi Trust, the KZN Homeschooling Association, and Let's Do It Together for Education, an NPO working in the education space, to unpack this. Welcome to KZN Homeschool Association, Pestalozzi Trust members, and members of both the KZN Homeschool Association and the Pestalozzi Trust members, and the general public. My name is Christopher Cordero, and today I'm wearing my independent LearnFree hat, along with Dave Lars, who is here deputizing for his wife Diane from the KZN Homeschool Association. Diane unfortunately couldn't join us. Dave, welcome. Good to see you. You're a JCL member and we're in the meeting yesterday. Thanks for being here.
Thank you and good day to everyone.
And we're also joined by Naresh Badal. Naresh is from Let's Do It Together for Education. A well-known Naresh, you're a well-known homeschool and cottage school activist, most probably well-known in particular for going around the whole country during the Bella Bill hearing process to talk about particularly cottage schools and homeschooling in general. So welcome, Naresh. Glad to have you here today.
Morning, Christopher. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Naresh. And then also we're joined by Karen van Ostrom, the CEO of the Pestalozzi Trust.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
And thanks, Karen. And also by Uda de Wet. I'm laughing because I often quickly speak over Karen, so make me stop doing that, Karen. And welcome, Uda de Wet. Uda is a consultant to the trust, and you're the person who's been doing the heavy lifting on the registration forms and the guides to how to fill in the application forms. So welcome, Uda. Also, Uda, you're also a very good example of a homeschooler. You've got your kids with you. So I just want to say to everyone, this is a Pestalozzi Trust YouTube, so they mustn't expect not to see kids appearing. We won't become famous because during the interview a kid appeared when they shouldn't have, in a sense, because that's just the norm for us. We always have kids involved. So yeah. So thanks for taking time, particularly out of your family day, to be here, and the kids are welcome. So it's you and the kids who are in the video today.
Thank you, Christopher. And introducing the pineapple I'm currently cutting for the kids. So
okay. They brought it to you now, right? Well,
yes.
You're sitting doing nothing, so why shouldn't you be cutting a pineapple?
Exactly. I'm just sitting here.
Yeah.
So bring me a pineapple.
Okay, great. The pineapple is also very, very welcome. Please tell the pineapple. Okay, before we get to this alarming news from yesterday, and I'll say that yesterday we were all doing other things. I think particularly Karen and Uda and I think, Karen, you were keeping a closer eye on this meeting than Uda and I were. And then we started getting all of this kind of hectic WhatsApping going on because of what was going on in this JLC meeting. So before we start, I just want to perhaps viewers have not heard about the JLC or what a JLC is. I think we use a lot of jargon. So it's a joint liaison committee, and it's a joint liaison committee between homeschoolers and the department, or PEDs. But I'm going to not explain that. I'm going to ask you, Naresh. You've got a lot of experience on the JLC. Can you give us a bit of a background about JLCs or joint liaison committees, what they are and what they do?
Certainly, Christopher. So joint liaison committees typically are groups formed to facilitate communication, coordination, and collaboration between various stakeholders. And in this instance, stakeholders in home education, parents, homeschool associations, curriculum service providers, provincial education departments. And the purpose is to bring all these organizations and representatives together so that we could discuss, address, and work on specific issues or concerns within the home education sector. And each province has its own JLC, which consists of representatives of parents, home education associations, interest groups, and we're supposed to meet once a term to discuss issues or to raise concerns and propose solutions and come to agreements on matters regarding regulatory changes, educational standards, interpretations of policies, and those kind of things.
Okay, great. I mean, that's very, very comprehensive. Thank you. So, I mean, the point is this should really be a positive and something that's actually helping to get understanding between homeschoolers and between the provincial education departments. But that's, of course, not what seems to have happened in KZN. And I think that's not unlike some of these earlier engagements that have taken place. And I think also KZN, just for the audience as well, KZN has had a bit of a fraught history when it comes to its JLC as well. But Karen, going back, I'm going to ask you because you've got the long-term experience long before, I think, well, long before Udo was involved, because Udo was in some ways always there, perhaps handing pineapples on to you when you were sitting in the chair during meetings. But you've got the longest experience with this. Can you just take us back in terms of a bit of the history of engagement between the homeschool community and the trust? And what's sort of the history been, and how do we get up to the creation of these joint liaison committees?
Yeah, so in KwaZulu-Natal, it has always been very difficult actually to make contact with the officials. So the trust has often reached out to the officials and to the department, its specific officials, but we couldn't actually manage to get any sensible reply, and there was never any invitation from their side for a constructive engagement. So in 2014-15, there was a large meeting with the homeschoolers convened by the DBE, where there were also KZN officials present. So that sort of broke the ice in a sense. But still, it was very difficult just to make contact with an official. Should we have any problem, say if there's a member of the trust who can't manage to get registered, then there was no reply. The phones, there was no one at the phone, or no email was ever answered. And then after the Bella Bill was published, we actually noticed there was actually a marked lack of engagement from the officials, but from the provinces, but specifically from KZN. Actually, I know that some of the KZN people have been sending emails, numerous emails, trying to get into contact with the official in charge there for home education without any reply, although they said in the meeting that they reply within seconds, but well, we haven't seen that. But they do try their best, and then we were actually very glad when the JLCs were officially introduced in the circular. The name of the circular S14 of 2020. It became quite a famous circular where the JLCs were introduced, and we were all very excited. Now we're going to get some contact, but it didn't work out that way in KZN.
Okay, great. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Yeah, so I think the history has been that there's been these attempts that have kind of there's been kind of periods of engagement and then periods of no engagement. That's across the whole that's across the whole country and with the National Department and homeschoolers. And the trust, I think, from 2017 began very much to put pressure on to say homeschoolers weren't consulted about the Bella Bill. And that pressure, I think, then eventually made the department realize they have to do something about engagement. And that was then, and then that then materialized into that 2020 circular where these JLCs or joint liaison committees were created. And there are similar committees, for example, for independent schools. But I think what was important there was that there was this constant pressure to say we need these engagements and we need them to engage the whole of the homeschooling community because of the diversity of views. I think it's also just important to point out that these engagements have never been about the billable. These engagements have always been about implementation of policy up until now. Now, I suppose technically they are a bit about the Bella Act now that the bill's been signed. It's not enforced yet, but it has been signed because now we're looking at the Bella Act becoming the basis for registration going forward. But Uda, I think what Karen was pointing out was that I think there'd been a lot of hope when this circular came out now 4 years ago. Certain provinces jumped on this quite quickly and did it very well. Gauteng comes to mind as perhaps an outstanding example. Western Cape, there have been periods where they haven't had meetings, but they at least have had meetings. But KZN has always been a bit of a problem, and this sort of came to a head towards the end of 2023, early 2024, in the National Task Team. So maybe you can explain what the National Task Team is, why provincial representation is important on the National Task Team, and then perhaps if you want to give us some of the history of what happened sort of January, February 2024 that led up to the creation of the KZN JLC.
So I quickly want to say something when you said it is not about the billable. In the circular, it actually specified that the meetings in the JLCs is about operational and implementation questions on home education. And I say this because throughout the public hearings, we've heard, no, we've engaged with homeschoolers on the billable and the JLCs was actually mentioned, but the formation document of the JLC specifies it's not about the billable. So I just wanted to say that. So the National Task Team is a task that is the National Task Team that writes the regulations for home education. So the Bella Act allows the minister to write regulations on the registration and administration of home education. And this task team is the task team that writes these regulations. So famously, the homeschoolers has not been engaged with in the writing of the Bella Act, or even to a large extent on the policy. So in the regulations, there was this change where they now actually asked home educators to serve on the National Task Team writing regulations. But these homeschoolers are selected from the provincial JLCs. So the idea originally was that each province would have a JLC. Each JLC would send 3 representatives to the National Task Team to represent home educators on the National Task Team writing the regulations. So that was the idea. That was not what happened. So I was, in my capacity as an executive member of the Gauteng Association for Homeschooling, I was asked to serve on the National Task Team from Gauteng, from the JLC in Gauteng. And when we started getting our letters, obviously the homeschoolers have a network and we talked to each other in the various provinces. So we asked, who else was asked in the various provinces. And it quickly turned out that in a number of provinces, there was no JLC and nobody was elected to serve on the National Task Team from those provinces. So Corin took, made a lot of effort to get in contact with the homeschoolers in these provinces and connect them with the provincial education authorities and ask these authorities to please elect them to the national task team so that we have people from these provinces serving on the national task team. And KZN was one of these people. And when Corin originally tried to connect the people, the officials at the KZN provincial department said, no, they are not going to send names of people they don't know. So they refused to elect people to the national task team at that stage, basically because they don't know the homeschoolers. And the thing is, it was not our problem. The homeschoolers actually tried to engage, and they just said, well, we don't know you, so we are not going to send names. So that was in, goodness, when was it? When did we start? I think it was 2021, Christopher? Or was it?
Yeah,
no,
I mean, but I think it,
yeah,
yeah,
I think it was
I mean,
2022.
yeah.
And from then, the homeschoolers on the national task team was going like, guys, we don't have representation from all the provinces. Where are all of the provinces? We don't have homeschoolers on here. And it is important for us to have people there. So just on a practical level, the concerns in a province like Northern Cape, where you have these huge distances between homeschoolers, are vastly different from a province like Gauteng, where everyone basically lives on each other's laps. So it's the situation in the provinces differ. The way officials apply things differs in provinces. So there's really a need for people to be able to give their input. And obviously we need homeschooling voices on the national task team as well. And the input of the people who know home education into the regulations. So we've been fighting that for basically 2 years. And then beginning of this year in January, we have had a special national task team. So the homeschoolers, or some of the homeschoolers on the national task team, wrote a letter to the chairperson stating some concerns. And one of these concerns was that there were no representation from some of the provinces, including KZN. And in that meeting, the chairperson basically, well, originally he said, while they tried to engage with the homeschoolers, and the homeschoolers, they couldn't wait for homeschoolers to come to the table, so they just went ahead. And we were like, no, wait. That is not what happened. We were ready to come to the table. There's homeschoolers in each province ready to come to the table. It's not us who doesn't want to come to the table. It is the provincial education department who is not giving the names through. So he then basically had a bit of a chat with the provincial education departments, and then they finally apparently convinced the KZN department to set up the JLC. So I hope that was not too long.
No,
I get very
that's
passionate on that subject.
No, I understand, because that's been very annoying. But and you're
Yes.
quite right. I mean, yeah. But thank you very much, and also thanks for fighting for this so long in that NTT. Thank you very much. I think before even I joined, you were fighting this battle. Yeah. So I think that gives a very good understanding of where it kind of brings us up to the fact that then a JLC was created in KZN. It actually took, I think it took another about 6 or 9 months after February for them to eventually have a first meeting, and us sending names a few times to say invite these people. But then that allows me kind of to hand over to ask. So I think everyone now knows what is a JLC, what's the National Task Team, why they're important. But then at your second meeting, I think your first meeting was really to elect people to the National Task Team and cover some other issues. Then at the second meeting of the KZN JLC, you had all of this drama which developed yesterday. So I'm going to hand over. I don't know if Dave or Naresh, whoever you wants to start, but please jump in and tell us, because we're now getting to the heart of why we're making this video. And I'm sure while we're speaking, there's alarm spreading in homeschooling circles. So one thing I should just say before I hand over to you guys is, what we're saying here applies strictly to KZN, because there's a big divergence that we're picking up in different provinces. We'll come to that at the end, but we're talking specifically about KZN here. And Dave, Naresh, tell us, you were having a calm day yesterday to some extent, and then you had a few bombshells dropping in the meeting on this issue and on other issues, but on this issue that parents, if they don't have a degree or a diploma, will not be allowed to homeschool their kids. So either, I don't know, Dave or Naresh, I don't know who'd like to begin and give us all the background, what happened yesterday. Dave, it looks like you're ready to talk.
Yeah, the question, or rather the order that they gave parents that can't home educate without a degree was and maybe because Naresh was actually leading the charge in that, and he was quite fired up with that, and he was also met with fire. It was quite a fiery, and it's a pity that Alna is not on here because she was also very fired up about that subject as well. And when we asked about the criteria that they're reading from, and Alma even asked, "Can you please give us this criteria?" They've kind of refused to give us the criteria and just referred us to the HOD. We can get the criteria from there. So yeah, that question order that they gave was quite a shocker. I mean, I don't know where they got this from. Definitely nothing that I've heard so far. And when we asked about the how they're going to apply this, I don't know if it was the legal advisor. I don't remember quite sure. He also got quite emotional about it, and I remember him and Naresh also got into a little bit of words about it. So maybe Naresh is actually the right person because he was directly involved in that conversation.
Yeah, Naresh, tell us what happened. Who are you fighting with now?
So I think, Christopher, it was supposed to be a standard JLC meeting where they gave us an agenda. They were going to discuss feedback from DBE's advocacy with regards to Bella Act. And we anticipated that since the Act is not yet enacted, that they would probably end up following the policy on home education. And like you say, it just came as a total shocker when the KZN officials stated that if any parent who wants to home educate their child, their application will be rejected if they do not have a tertiary qualification. And, their argument was that you cannot be more competent than people that are qualified to teach, for one. And the interpretation of the entire Act and the policy on home education is very skewed. So that obviously, got us all riled up, and we all started objecting, and the arguments about competencies and qualifications, and it's not in the law that you have to be qualified. And as that conversation progressed, then they started with other comments. And one of the things that they said was that children need to be protected even from their parents. And that was deeply offensive and dismissive, I think, in the capacity of parents to act in the interest of their children, because these comments really do not foster any kind of spirit of collaboration or respect between DBE and parents. And it was a very bullish sort of meeting where they weren't prepared to reason or listen. It was, this is what we are told, and we are protecting ourselves against any legal issues and battles that may come. And surprisingly, they also said that there were about 180 applications that they received for home education, but only approved 4. And their reasoning was that parents are using tutor centers, parents are using online schools, but they refused to give any further information about how many were rejected because parents do not have tertiary qualifications. And it wasn't a conversation that they were prepared to engage in. They were just wanting to tell us that this is how they're going to do it, this is their interpretation of it, and this is what it's going to be. And then it went on to religious learners, where they now say that in particular, the Muslim community is not going to be allowed time off from school, as other provinces allow learners to do their religious studies. Learners doing religious studies must do the include secular subjects in their curriculum. That created
Sorry, Naresh, I'm going to ask you a specific question about that later because I think it's a specific sort of area of interest. So essentially, this was what you were told at the meeting, was that if a parent does not have a diploma, does not have a degree, or tertiary qualification, they won't be able, they will be rejected in Gauteng, and that rejection ratio is extremely alarming. If you're approving 4 out of 180 applications, and that appears to be the reverse of other departments. But we can look at that a little bit later in general discussion. Is there anything else in general that you want to add about? Because we'll also go through some of these requirements later. Or is there anything else in general about this issue of the idea that you have to be qualified as a parent? Other than that, I think it upsets people and it's very offensive. Anything else that either Dave or Naresh you'd like to add?
I think, Christopher, we can't equate the two. Qualified doesn't necessarily mean competent, and not wanting to speak ill of public education, but we see public educators that are qualified but aren't able to teach. Home education has a very long history of parents without qualifications who've successfully home educated their children, and this cannot be disregarded in any way to say that parents must be, without qualifications, are not capable of educating their child.
Right. Dave, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, basically what Naresh has said, and who better than the parent that knows their child as well. I said earlier, just in general conversation to Corin, that from a personal point of view, I know that Diane is doing the very best she can, and she really is. I mean, you can see it in our child's marks and stuff. So he's not lacking in anything because he's doing it from home. So, and she does not have a degree. So saying that the parent can't teach because they don't have a degree is it just didn't sit well, unfortunately.
No, and I think, Corin, I'm going to come to you in a second. I just want to say one thing. We did try and invite Elna Vickman, who's also a very well known, also a KZN JLC member, and I think also actually on the national one of the persons whose name has been put forward to the national task team, and I think people know Elna from her comments in the activist groups, but we did ask Elna, but obviously we put this together literally within minutes, so not everyone who we reached out to was available. But Corin, Dave was making the point that and I must say this also threw me completely, because this is like one of those dead and buried kind of homeschool issues. It's a bit like, it's even less than socialization. So, you always get the socialization, how your kid is going to be socialized, and we always, and it constantly does come up. But I mean, you'd think that was dead and buried, that people that, most people say there's too much socialization in homeschooling, can ask any exhausted parent. But the problem with, but this particular one, parents can't home educate, we thought that was like dead and buried. We thought we'd never hear it again. Can't home educate without a degree, but actually now it's come up. So Corin, you've got once again the long history. Give us a little bit in terms of the background, in terms of what's the research telling us about whether this is true or not.
Thank you. Yes, I've had very long history in homeschooling. So I've been homeschooling since 1992, when we started the first association for homeschooling, and then we've always had workshops on homeschooling, practical homeschooling, and other aspects of homeschooling. And I'm also serving on the Global Home Education Exchange, which is an international group of homeschooling leaders. And it has been confirmed in research numerous times that parental qualifications do not have an influence on the success, the academic success of the children. And there is actually research that you can look up for yourself, which confirms that, by Brian Ray and Rudner and other academics in the US, we've actually had very interesting situations. For instance, a child was very shy, and they came to us, and the child wanted to do grade 7, standard 5, but a mom had only grade 8, standard 6. And they were so encouraged by the whole homeschooling situation that they started studying together. And in the end, they got their matric. And it was always a very good story for us, just to confirm that the homeschooling is a very different situation where attachment is very important. That attachment between the parent and the child is very special. And it's been shown all over by someone like Peter Gray, for instance, that attachment is necessary for education, for the education actually to work, and for information to be laid down in the child's brain and in his whole being. So this remarks like this simply has no basis in research, and it has to be worked. It has to be. They'll have to show why they're spreading this in KZN.
Yeah, sort of like they've dug up an old corpse now and reanimated it.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do is we will link in the links to the video. We'll link it to the NERI research by Dr. Brian Ray, and I think we'll also do hopefully some follow-ups, just unpacking the research a little bit more on this area. But I think I mean, as I say, it's so weird because this consensus, the research over the years, it's one of the soundest, most solid pieces of homeschool research that remarkably, the educational attainment of the parent bears little relation to the educational outcomes for the learner. So that the KZN Education Department has chosen this in particular as an issue to focus on is particularly strange. But we will link that research, and it's the need to reinvent the wheel and go back and bring and highlight these issues again. I mean, I think I can say that the reason that the Act doesn't include this, because this idea did exist previously in the department. The reason the Act doesn't include this is because the department was eventually convinced by the research, by all of the interactions with the trust and homeschoolers, that this would be kind of a stupid avenue to pursue. But yeah, that is we are where we are now. Let's perhaps what I'd like to do now is if we could just go to some of the other issues that could be causing concern. I think we'll do that quite briefly because we don't want to make this video too long. And some other issues were mentioned in meetings, so we'll just run through those quickly. Uday, I mean, I know you've done this a lot because you've got, I don't know how many, you and Karen have got, I don't know how many applications going past you every day and queries. So some of the issues that have been raised, and please, Naresh, Dave, feel free to jump in here, is that the home education must be at the site of the home. I think that is an uncontroversial issue in general, because that's the definition involved in the definition of homeschooling. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Uda, Karen.
I just maybe want to say on that, so the Bella Act is clear that the Bella Act specifically says that the home education must predominantly be at home. The SASA only said it's education at home. It didn't actually have a definition in. So it's always been basically the understanding that home education would be at home, but homeschoolers do understand that in a more broader sense, in the sense of family, not necessarily the actual physical home address. So if a parent teaches the child in the park, we would still consider it home education. Or there would be situations where a parent educate the child at a work address or something like that. And so there are a few like exceptions that one would say to the strict home site address rule. But I think if somebody does have one of those possible exceptions, then it would be a good idea to talk to the trust directly about that.
Yeah, so I think trust members can sort of, I think, and that's an important thing about all of this, what you're saying, and then and the advice in general is that it's given on the basis that the person does have the appropriate backup if a problem eventuates. Because as we can see now in KZN, this does happen. These wild and arbitrary rulings are made. So that's just important to know that. I think just important also that people make sure that this is just a comment on something that was raised, is that but this was covered extensively in the members' guides of the Pestalozzi Trust, which is that people should make sure that their address where the child is educated and the home address are the same address on the forms. I don't think I'm going to worry too much about going into that. Just in terms of the issue of parents having enough time, where parents are working or self-employed, anything, I don't know, Karen, you've dealt with a number of these cases. I think the golden rule is that a parent must be careful when filling in the form, that if they are self-employed or they're a single parent who is employed, that they explain where they have the time to support the child's learning. Karen, anything on that?
Yes, as you say, it's very important for the parents just to make it clear that they actually do have time to educate the child. So nowadays it's not strange for a mom to have to be working on the side, to be doing the books of her husband's business or something like that. And but officials don't always understand it like that. So if you say, and it's something that a mom is proud of, they would like to say, yes, actually I'm also employed. But if it's not full-time, you can consider just saying that you're not unemployed. Otherwise, just explain it very clearly that in school time, school hours, you are actually available to teach your child.
Thanks. Yeah, but that's excellent. Or should we say that there's enough time? But I think by school hours, you don't necessarily mean when the school clock rings next door 8 to 5, whatever it is, or 8 to 2, whatever it is. But you mean during time for learning in the home, there is enough time to do that. Just in terms of, and I see that the KZN is saying that they're fairly flexible on these points at the moment, but so I think maybe I could just say that in general, I think all provinces are saying people should now be applying for 2025. They don't need to apply for 2024. But that's every day that becomes almost more impossible to apply for 2024. Although we will say there, just important that if you need to have proof of registration in 2024 for any particular reason, you should then apply for this year so that you have that proof of registration. But in general, people are applying for 2025. And this is an issue of dispute. I know it's come up in the National Task Team. And I think what I should say is that some of these rules which are being given now sort of off the fly by KZN are matters that are under discussion in the National Task Team on the regulations. And on many of these matters, the trust is undertaking to get legal opinion. Where the community or the people in the homeschooling National Task Team members feel that what is being suggested is not in accord with the law and is inappropriate. But there is this issue that's always raised about whether you can home educate without prior consent. So the idea is that you can't start home educating and before you've got your approval. I think that's been rejected very roundly in the National Task Team for a whole number of practical reasons. But maybe I don't know if you want to just go through some of the practical reasons why that won't work and why that's a problem. I don't know if Udo or Karen, if you want to comment, or Naresh, or even Dave, if you've got issues of experience in terms of this. Maybe I should ask one person at a time, otherwise it gets confusing. So I don't know, Karen, anything from you on that?
Yeah, well, if parents have a real crisis, if they want to protect their child's life, they should just remove the child. So they can't sit and wait and see if the child gets home alive from school or not. So there's no fixed time when parents start home educating. And so I think that makes a real good practical sense, not to be flexible about that date.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we get this phenomena which is not which is actually which is in a number of places the government seems to understand on the one hand, is there's a lot of school refusal where kids literally that morning say, it's not happening, I'm tying myself to the bed, I'm not going back to that place, I'm refusing to go to school. Now, what is the parent supposed to do? Literally assault the kid to bring them to school because the department would like you to not begin homeschooling until they have looked at your form, kind of thing. So clearly it's not practical. Those are the arguments we're making in the National Task Team. But I think just to say that it does seem that at least at the moment, KZN is accepting that they're taking a flexible approach there. I think just to finish this little section off, I want to just ask Naresh perhaps, and then Dave, if you can comment after Naresh, there is this talk about them saying that I'm not clear on exactly what it is, but the curriculum provider, the person that's being used, the institution that's being used, if that institution is not open inverted commas, registered close inverted commas, they're not going to also open inverted commas, close inverted commas, accept it. I don't know what either of those terms mean, and that the application will be rejected on that basis. You both of you were in the meeting. Naresh, what was that about? What seems to be going on then?
So the issue here, Christopher, is that it started off with comments regarding and a discussion regarding reports, because they want mandatory reports every quarter. And we argued that as per Bella Act and the policy on home education, parents only need to provide reports at the end of each phase, grades 3, 6, and 9. And as that conversation progressed, they then came out and said that the DBE has a list of approved curriculum service providers, but they refuse to mention who those approved curriculum service providers are. They said they would email it to us, and they said that there are new curriculum service providers who've just popped up in the last couple of months or in the last couple of years, and they are not going to accept reports from all curriculum service providers. Only those approved curriculum service providers will be allowed to submit reports to them. They also failed to accept or understand that some curriculum service providers provide hybrid approaches to learning. Some have online classes, some have book-based, and as soon as any curriculum service provider has anything to do with online, they're rejecting it and assuming that it is an online school, and they then say that they're waiting for the framework on registration of online schools to come out, and those schools must be regulated and applied separately. But that's basically what they had to say about the approved curriculum service providers. And again, no matter how many questions we asked, they weren't forthcoming with answers, not willing to engage or discuss things with us.
Dave, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Naresh basically covered the.
No, well, I mean, that is one of the strangest things I've ever heard, because the whole essence of even the policy, and this is how it's being implemented in other provinces, is that it's the parent who has to compile the report. So where parents do use other people, tutors, etc., for support, the report should not, and in fact, technically, the only people that can compile a report are actually, I mean, you can be charged with fraud for compiling a report if you're not, for example, a registered school. So only a registered operating brick and mortar school can actually technically provide a report in the phase in the compulsory education phase. There are some different issues relating to the matric results, but to the matric phase. But in that phase, only a school can provide a report. So that's extremely weird. So yeah, I mean, we now have a situation we're completely different to what the policy says, which is that it's the parent who has to actually do the reporting. And that's the parent who's taking the responsibility. But Dave, I think was it Dave? Did you have your hand raised, or was it Naresh? I'm going to assume Naresh, I thought. Naresh, did you have your hand up?
No, it was an accident. Sorry, Christopher.
Great. Okay.
Well, I just maybe can say, sorry, Christopher,
Please.
I just maybe want to make a note on that, that it seemed from the comments from the people sorry, the people who attended the JLC, the KZN JLC, is that the KZN department is very, like, they want it to be compulsory, quarterly reports. But in other JLCs, Gauteng at least, is very clear on it that it's not compulsory, it's voluntary. They ask for it. What did they say? It's just a friendly request was the last one that they tried to clarify. It is not compulsory, and they said they cannot require you to send it. And if you don't want to send a report, nothing is going to happen, etc., etc., etc. So parents unfortunately think it is a requirement if the PED asks for it. So that is a different matter. But other PEDs, and I almost think Western Cape made a similar comment in their JLC, but I have to check up on that. But other JLCs is not at all saying this is compulsory. So KZN is very unique in that way, that they're actually applying yet another thing that is not in even in the policy. It's just like a random requirement from the DBE side.
Yeah, it's something they kind of try and extract and try and kind of sort of justify from the policy, but there's even in the policy no clarity. It's not something that's in SASSA, and it's very clear in the Bella Act that the monitoring regime is the quarterly report by the monitoring regime is the end of phase report by the competent assessor. There's nothing in the Bella Act which requires any other form of so-called monitoring. Other than that, it's the parent, once again, that must do it. It says the parent shall monitor the child's work. So it's not, but what that monitoring would be and giving that to some external party, other than we assume the competent assessor who may ask for it at the end of a quarter, at the end of the phase, so end of every 3 years, there's no requirement for it. So it's a complete, complete something that's been kind of sucked out of someone's thumb. The requirement to do it. I do believe that what we've heard is that the DBE likes to have some figures to include in their reporting. So they like to, for reporting, they have to do about how homeschoolers are performing. They like to have those figures, but that is not anywhere a legal requirement. This issue is one of those issues which is being tackled in the National Task Team on Regulations. So I think that wraps up where we are more or less, and I see the time is moving on. So let me just get, perhaps, if I can go to that issue that you raised, Naresh, before we start wrapping up. If I can go to that issue that you raised about HIV schools, what are they? Just let's give the audience some sense of what the issue is. I should probably say that you're Hindu, so that you're not Muslim, but you obviously got a concern about religious education, religious freedom. So please just give us a bit of background. What are these schools and what is the issue?
So, Christopher, many Muslim Islamic learners follow what is called HIV studies. And HIV studies is the memorization of the Quran. It's quite an academic and very rigorous process. And you find that quite often kids will take a 2-year gap in their schooling to complete their religious studies and then return to school. Now, over and above the memorization of the Quran, some kids then go on with further studies and pursue a qualification called an Alim's qualification. And that's a recognized qualification, and it's a listed qualification on SAQA. And an Alim is basically a Muslim learned scholar who provides extensive, someone who has extensive education in Islamic texts and provides advice to the community, interpretations of religious texts to the community. And what they have now said is that in KZN, you're not allowed to pursue religious studies without doing secular subjects as well. And many of these HIV learners, they take the time off from school to complete their religious studies because they're not able to cope with doing both secular subjects and meeting the assessment components of secular education and then still doing memorization of the Quran at the same time.
there. Obviously, in KZN, that's going to be a huge issue because there's obviously a big Muslim population in KZN. So thanks for bringing us up to date on that. So there's another very concerning, controversial aspect from your meeting, which wasn't short on controversy, it seems. So let me, as in wrapping up, let me just start by wrapping up by saying, let me give, and I said I'd give everyone the opportunity to ask me questions, and you can be the interviewers, and I'll put my more sort of my less independent cap on. Is there anything you guys want to question, want to ask, maybe that you think the audience would want to know? And obviously everyone else can feel free to also answer, but if there's anything that the audience would want to know, you, I think, are in more contact with home schoolers on the front line than I am. If there's any questions, anything that you'd like to ask, or people have asked you. Karen?
Yes, Christopher, I would like to know what is your opinion or your advice. Many homeschoolers now ask, in KZN, do we really have to register? Should we fall into the trap or not?
So of course you go straight for the jugular, Karen, like you always do, right? There was no kind of like easy leading question here. Okay. Look, I think let me answer it this way. The legal requirement for registration is in a sense independent of how the department acts. So before you can raise any defense, you do need to go through all of the steps of trying to, and I'm going to throw this one back to you because I know something in your background that you told me recently. So I'm hitting this ball straight back at you. So the issue is that you do have to make this initial effort. Now, I do understand that there are going to be people who are not going to want to interact and do that. They may be scared. And that's a reality that we're going to face. But I certainly couldn't advise anyone not to do it. And the correct legal advice would be, you've got to take steps. And I think people have forgotten, because it's very far in the background. Something that you were explaining to me is that in the very early days of homeschooling, you actually did this. This is what the homeschool families did. They didn't just say, we're not talking to the department. They took some steps. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of background about that. And that's my ball knocked back to you.
I'm catching it. Yes. So right in the beginning, when we tried to register, because the law said you should register. So for about 3 years, we made contact with the department, and we tried to get sufficient info from them to be able to register. What are the requirements and that we have to meet, etc., etc. But after 3 years, we just gave up, because we never got any reply.
Okay, great. And when you say we, that's homeschoolers in general, and actually your family. So Uda, who's there sitting there, she was one of the subjects of that application, in a sense.
True, yes.
Okay, great. So any other further questions?
Yes, Christopher, I've got a question, if you don't mind. But before I ask my question to you, I just want to bring to your attention that there were 2 other possible issues or things that were said in yesterday's meeting that's quite concerning. And so we managed to clarify the one. KZN will continue with home verification on all approved applications. And we pointed out that is not as per Bella Act. It's been removed. So until the Act is enacted, they're going to continue with that. But once the Act is enacted, they will stop that. And, the officials made a very concerning comment that when they receive an application, it takes them a few seconds to process the application. So we don't know whether or not they're really going through an application and how well they are reading the letters of motivation that parents are sending and looking at the documentation, because that certainly can't just take a few seconds. Coming back to the questions that I would like to ask you.
Sorry, Lurish, let me answer those 2 as kind of questions, maybe. So I think the first one is, particularly, I think we can say that if there's trust members and they are being asked for a home visit, and a home visit is an extremely intrusive and we would argue unconstitutional action, when there are other means to get that information, that was shared in a legal. The reason that home visits are out of the Act is there was an opinion, a legal opinion, council opinion, shared with the minister on this particular issue, on the illegality of the unconstitutionality of a home visit as an intrusive invasion into the private sphere. There were certain departments, and it most probably now become evident that KZN was one of them, who kept pushing back on that. But interestingly, the minister herself, this was Minister Mochecha at the time, was always happy to say, no, take those home visits out. It's actually something, I don't have time to send officials to do home visits and people don't want to see them. And they'd received those legal opinions. But someone kept putting it in until in the very finally, literally on the lunch break, when the bail bill was being discussed in the National Assembly, home visits then on the course of that lunch break were finally removed. So home visits are out of the Bella Act, and the reason they're out of the Bella Act is because they are highly intrusive. Now, there is a provision for home visits in the KZN regulations, which I think you may be asking me about soon, but we would still hold that that's unconstitutional. So if that happens, then there's certainly steps that can be taken, and we suggest that trust members get hold of the trust if they don't want a home visit and it's getting forced on them. Yeah, and then to the second part of your question, yes, that it takes seconds to review an application. Well, that clearly shows that they're not applying their mind. Uda, I said, was working on the guidelines for the motivation. Those guidelines are actually drawn up from the Children's Act, from the considerations of child's best interest in the Children Act. And I don't think you could read through that guideline in a few seconds, never mind make a decision on that basis. So if that happens, then once again, that decision becomes highly challengeable. But Naresh, to your questions then, those were statements I turned into questions, but then to your questions. Sorry, Uda, yes, go ahead, please jump in there.
Yeah, so according to the information I got, Naresh, you earlier said that 170 applications was received and I think 3 or 4 was accepted. But the other number there is, I think it was 33 or 34 was rejected. So they are sitting on 130 odd applications that has not been processed, which makes one wonder, if it only takes a few seconds, why it has not been processed. So
Uda's eye for detail shows up again. Yeah, Naresh, your questions? Thank you, Uda.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. So we know that currently there is a case against KZN for declining learners who are using online schools. How does this now impact that case, or will it have any impact on that particular case? And maybe you could give us an update on that. And then in terms of, what JLCs are supposed to be doing, there's supposed to be some sort of consistency amongst the provinces, because members of the JLCs then are part of the national task team. Is there any consistency with KZN in any of the other provinces?
Let me answer the last first. No, the other provinces are very variable. I think, Uda, let me bounce this one to you, because I think you were talking about the Free State. Maybe you can give an example of what's happening in the Free State in terms of what I know we did cover a little bit before. Maybe you want to say something more about that, and perhaps Gauteng, where you serve. I don't know.
yeah, so the other provinces are the complete, well, let me say Free State is completely the opposite of KZN, according to the chairperson of the Free State Association. So they had meetings with the homeschoolers a week or 2 ago, and they were basically just like, they have never rejected an application, and the only reason your application won't be processed is if all the documents are not there or it's not completed. They've never rejected an application. If you don't know or you don't use grades, then they will just you can just send them the detail and they will, for statistical purposes, ascribe a grade, but it's not enforced. And they are just like, so absolutely, come one, come all. We just want to help you kind of people. Gauteng is very reasonable as well. I must say I'm very impressed with the lady in Gauteng. She makes an effort to understand homeschooling, which is quite rare in in terms of officials that I've ever dealt with. She's basically the first official I've ever talked to that made an effort to go and write notes about various methodologies. So they are very, like, you can actually talk to them and they understand problems and they stick with the law. So they would actually say, you know, we are not going to enforce home visits, for example, because we can't enforce the policy strictly. So they are very, very relaxed and they don't have any additional requirements or anything like that. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. I mean, some provinces we don't know because we haven't been able to reach the people in the last 4 years, but the others, the ones we know of, is mostly very reasonable and very relaxed about the whole thing.
Yeah, and if we can't reach them, we don't know how the poor homeschoolers do, but that's a different issue.
Yes. I
But
mean,
yeah, but
one homeschooler actually went to, I think it was the Eastern Cape PED.
yeah.
They drove there to try and reach the people, and there were nobody at the building, and they were just like, okay, I give up.
Naresh, you wanna just respond there?
No, I was actually hoping to ask you another question. Sorry, man, Christopher.
Okay, now I'll cover. We'll yeah. Let me cover these and then we'll get there. Karen, I don't know if you wanted to say about Western Cape, but I mean, I think we also know the situation in the Western Cape. I think you're on mute, Karen.
Sorry, in the West Cape, the official has stated very clearly that he just wants peace with home educators. So no conflict, just come all, and we'll accept anything, and just ask and we'll help you, and there's no problems. So
Right.
yeah, in the Western Cape, there's actually very, very little hurdles for them to overcome in order to get registered.
And I can just
Yeah,
maybe say that
sorry, okay.
in Western Cape, they actually said that they are not going to apply a 30-day registration period. And they were asked what happens if you register, if they find out you're not registered, and they said, well, then they will help you register. So they are very, very relaxed. And they said they have no idea how the assessments is going to work because they can't apply CAP. So, it's kind of also like throw your hands in the air kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the attitude so let me and I think I was offended the people in the Western Cape a little bit in the National Task Team meeting because I was kind of saying in the meeting we need to enact very clearly from based on the Bella Act the procedures if you refuse someone. How do you've got to send a letter, you've got to give reasons, etc. And the attitude from most of the departments was like, Kodaro's gone off his rocker again. And what is he on about? Because we don't refuse people easily. We're here to help. Our approach is we do this anyway. So I think Western Cape and other departments were saying very clearly they're there to help facilitate your registration, not to obstruct your registration. So I will in defense of myself say KZN proves my point about why we need those particular protections in the regulations and we're not importing them into the regulations. They actually are in the Bella Act, and why we just need them, while we need the procedures around them regulated in the Bella in the regulations. But I think that's been the attitude throughout the provinces really that we've seen, is that people are there to, I think one official from another province, I don't want to name names, but said, look, I've never rejected anyone. I'm here to help people and foster education. So, Naresh, to answer your question, unfortunately, and I should actually say as well, from the research that the Trust did, KZN is the third biggest province in terms of homeschoolers by far. So almost West Gauteng, then the Western Cape, then KZN are in a league of their own in terms of their size. And then the others are much smaller, but KZN is the standout province that we have problems with. You asked about the legal case. So that case is proceeding. One of the sort of hurdles or problems in the case is that, like many things in KZN, the office of the state attorney there is overwhelmed. They constantly miss court dates. So what happens is then you have to go back to court to make them come to court, in a sense. And then as that happens, the trust actually asks for its costs. So this matter has dragged for a unconscionably long period, but it's part of the process. So that's really what's happening in terms of that case. But it is now beginning to enter a kind of final phase. Maybe I can I'll take a few minutes, but we've been speaking for quite a while. I suppose if you're in for a penny by now, you're in for a pound. So I might as well give a bit of information. These cases have two parts, what's called a part A of a review. So it's a review of the minister's decision. There's a part A of the review where you ask for all the information that the minister, in this case, the MEC, that the MEC or that the official used to make their decision. And then in part B, if you find that they've made a bad decision on the basis of part A, you then proceed with part B, which is the request for that decision to be reviewed. That second part of the review application is what's starting now. Affidavits have been sent to the founding affidavits, what's called the second founding affidavit, because it's part of the second action, the part B action, has been sent to the state attorney in KZN. The state attorney has missed their return dates. So we're once again in that cycle about what do we do now that they've missed their return dates. And there are a few more steps, but if they don't return, we'll go for a process of summary judgment. So getting the court to basically decide. Cases do take a long time. If it's on the opposed role in KZN, from now it can still take 9 to 12 months. How does it impact this current situation? Well, I just must also describe the case correctly for you. Although kind of in offhand it's been described as online schooling. It's not specifically about online schooling. It's about parents who use online resources to supplement their homeschooling. So and in this case, there's different situations pertaining to different families. But in one case, just to give you an example of how arbitrary the decision has been by the department, in one case, the family in question uses a boxed curriculum, a physical boxed curriculum, but it appears that because when the DBE or when the PED, when the officials in KZN looked at the website to check up about this particular curriculum provider, they saw that curriculum provider also has an online school, so that was rejected as an online school application. Now, there is unfortunately at the moment no space, no regulations to regulate online schooling in the true sense of online schooling, so that the distinction is, and Pestalozzi Trust members will know this because we cover this in detail on a whole session we did on online schooling and preparing for the regulations. Preparing for registration. But the department, and this is the DBE, draws a distinction between online schooling and between homeschooling. Homeschooling is where the parent takes responsibility, and the parent is then free to use, as they've always done over the last more than 25 years, although I don't think we had high-speed fiber when Karen started with UDA 25 years ago or more in 1992. That's something didn't have that, but it's always been that you've got this wide range of resources that you could use. Obviously, in recent years, we've used more online resources than people sending videos around. So that's always been what it is. Online schooling, when it finally comes into operation, is going to be a different thing where you register, where you join the school, you enroll your child in the school, and the school is the entity that's registered with the state. So you can almost draw it in this way. You, the family, are registered with the state, or the learner is registered with the state under homeschooling, and the parents take responsibility. In online schooling, the learner is enrolled with the school registered with the state, and the school takes responsibility, just as they would in a normal school. So that's the distinction. And in the case, we're dealing with situations of homeschoolers who arbitrarily have been refused because the department looks and says, oh no, you are doing an online school. There's some history to that, but that's essentially where we are. So the very simple answer there is one, the how it will impact, we can't really know, but hopefully, as this case progresses, and obviously the trust always tries to avoid conflict. So if the trust can get a settlement in some way from the department, the trust will try to do that. But as this case progresses, hopefully it will influence how KZN acts. The trust has, as I mentioned already, had costs awarded over previous parts of this case. So we're hoping that reason, as in with many issues with KZN, we are hoping that reason will prevail. But in KZN, you have to keep your fingers crossed. Any further questions? Because I think we must start getting to wrap up.
Yeah, sorry, Christopher, if you don't mind, one question and one
feel
request.
Free.
So the question I have is, does LearnFree or the Pestalozzi Trust have any evidence that would support the KZN's point of view that home education is inferior to public school? And my request then is also that, the KZN JLC is currently in its infancy. People like yourself, Karen, the Pestalozzi Trust, LearnFree, UDA are highly respected within homeschool communities. And we know that this issue is going to create a lot of fear amongst homeschooling parents. So what advice would you give to them in trying to mitigate and manage their fear and not, allow themselves to spin into a panic because of what is happening here now? Because people will more than likely take your advice than our advice.
I'm not always sure about that, but perhaps yeah, let me think about it. I think of different ways of answering that, just the different people answering it. So I think let me give a general legal answer, which is that I just don't. I would honestly, but I do understand that this is difficult. I, as honestly as a parent, would not become incredibly worried about this, because this is like, from a legal perspective, this is legal craziness. It's like, and I think that KZN does have a complex legal situation, and I don't think the officials have had the time to come to grasps with all of that. So I wouldn't take it very seriously, to be perfectly honest, but I really do understand why people take it seriously. But I personally wouldn't take it very seriously. I would wait for a month or two to let the I would just, in a month or two, look at this again and let everything shake itself out. And also we're expecting that the act will come into force on the 13th of December. Once the act comes into force, the legal position will be, I wouldn't say it wouldn't be clearer, because I think the legal position is clear. What will happen is it will be easier to convince people without having to do a lot of research about what the legal position is, because you can just refer them to the act. But we're still very far down this track, and there's still regulations that have to come out. There's still letters that are being written to the president. So this is all still in flux. What I would just say in general is, before people register, they should understand properly what they're doing. And that's why the trust does its program to help people. And we do think that 13th, look, I may be wrong, but we do think the 13th is the date. But we'll see what happens. So I just want to maybe ask, I think I'm going to bat the question maybe second to Uda and then third to Karen, although really Karen should have answered this first, because she's going to give the most important part. But I'm just going to ask Uda perhaps to just speak about the whole issue of what people should be doing in order to protect their rights, and what are the best steps to take to protect their rights. And then I'm going to just ask Karen, I think the more important thing, Karen, is of all of this, and I shouldn't have spoken first really, but just practically, what should people be doing in terms of their homeschooling? What should their attitude be about the practical things? Because what's most important here is, once again, I think we've got parents now who are going to be listening to an hour and a half of legal debate, and that sometimes obscures the most important thing, which is the child. So I'm going to ask you to come in on that. So Uda, I'm going to bat it to you and then to Karen.
Okay, so I think what people should do practically, the trust position is that we don't tell parents how to manage their relationship with the authorities. So we give good legal advice, proper legal advice, that the parents can make decisions based on that. And then we support that decision with the legal knowledge that you can use to support that position. So on the very basic level of do you register or not, that you have to look at the legal facts and make a decision on that. If you do apply for home education, I would very strongly recommend that you use the guides to prepare your application that the Pestalozzi Trust made for its members, because it was set up to protect your rights. So you have a watertight application that can be protected in court. And that is very important, because if you go into the process with a watertight application, then you don't have to be afraid of being set upon, because the official can't do something against the law, basically. So they have to obey the law. So if your application is adheres to the law, then you don't have to be afraid of the official. The caveat on that, I don't think I said that word correctly, but anyway, is that you can send an application to protect your rights, but you have to have teeth to back that up. So if you use the guides, then the assumption in the guides is that you do have legal backup. So if you're a member of the trust, then you do have good legal backup and you can have peace about that. If you listen to this and you're not a member, consider either joining the trust, or you have to get your own legal team to back you up and have them on speed dial if things go south. Because you can stand on your rights, but in the end, it's the court that has to force the official to respect the right. And there are some things that you can do, like try to put pressure and political pressure, but in the end, the court is the one that is going to have to enforce that. So I would say those two things. If you do apply, use the guides and make sure you have legal backup, good legal backup.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's very important, because we know how few lawyers. We deal even with the trust that deals within the circle of the lawyers who deal with in education, and we know even how few of those really understand home education, because it's not an area that many people practice in. Thank you, Uda. Karen, just from your side, will you give us some practical hints and tips in terms of dealing with this?
So in this whole crisis that many homeschoolers feel themselves in, the most important thing to remember is to keep your focus on your child. So if you feel you need to change it in your child's best interest. So don't let yourself be intimidated by what you think some official somewhere, some invisible official will like better. Focus on your child, because this is why you decided to homeschool in the beginning. You didn't decide to do this to please someone you don't even know. It's everything. Focus on your child and keep your family together by doing that. So this is the most important thing, and don't worry too much about things that you don't that the trust can deal with for you, because we have had success when we get a letter from a department. We can talk about we can talk to an official and just explain to the official what the law actually requires. And very often, mostly, we can actually convince the official that it's the better way is just to follow the law. So it has worked we actually have a proof that it has worked very well.
Thanks, Karen. That's great. I think we really should wrap up. So let me just ask then, actions? What are the next steps? What are different organizations doing? I know that I see from the groups that I think that the KZN KZN Homeschool Association is also going to have a meeting. I think you are doing something from your side, Naresh. So just let me start with you, Naresh, and just ask what your next steps are. And then I'll also just go to Karen. I think, and then we can wrap up. I don't know if you've got something to add there, Dave. I know you're here filling in for Dan, but you must probably haven't had a chance to have a full discussion on what KZN Homeschool Association will be doing. But Naresh, from your side.
So from our side, early this morning, we've already sent through an email to the provincial head of department, Nomsa Zwane. We've released communication to parents in various homeschool groups, and we've explained the situation to them, and we've asked them to all also email Nomsa Zwane, the provincial head, and to express their displeasure. And we're hoping that, pressure will be applied and that they will then reconsider the statements that they've made and rescind them. Further than that, I think the KZN JLC members are going to meet on their own as well to discuss alternative ways forward. And I think the KZN JLC members who are in all the KZN groups are also doing similar things of issuing statements in various groups. And I think the big thing is that we're just trying to calm parents at the moment, because that's where, all the problems are.
Yeah, and we all wish, that's one of the reasons we've done this so quickly, and we all wish the department wouldn't do these kind of things, which cause so much problem, and rather engage properly first before making statements. Karen, from the trust side?
The Pestalozzi Trust is going to write to the minister again. The minister has promised a meeting to the Pestalozzi Trust, so we are writing to the minister again, and there are many things that we would like to discuss, because we feel that we haven't been granted a place around the table as we should have, and the old story about proper consultations, and we'll keep our members updated with anything that happens. So we'll be in contact.
Thanks, Karen. So the next steps, obviously, letter to the minister raising this, and I think this just gives an example of exactly what we were saying all along, that if this act that the reason we are against this act is not out of some kind of weird kind of idea that we have, but out of the fact that we know it will not work in practice. And now, before the act is even being signed, we've got one province doing something completely different from another province. And one of the very reasons the act was, well, we were told we need this act, is so that we have uniformity of action. And we're seeing that the act is just creating exactly what we said would happen. So this almost kind of confirms that. And in some ways, to answer something Naresh did say, is that Naresh is actually completely correct. The Children's Act does not allow for, under the Children's Act, children have to be treated more or less the same in all provinces. So this has always been the historical problem with KZN, that if you're on the, and I think there's, I can't remember the exact border distinctions, but if you're on the Free State side of Van Rieren's Pass, one kind of thing applies, and the moment you go down Van Rieren's Pass, something else completely different applies, and you're a welcome friend. You're a welcome friend at height, and lower down you're a terrible enemy, and that's always been the historical problem with KZN. So let me just perhaps on that final note wrap up. Any further comments or questions? Just a final word from everyone, if you want to say anything. Let me ask something to wrap up from you, Naresh. Just a final word.
No, so obviously, the first thing I would like to say to parents is please do not panic. People are attending to this matter. This is not the law. This should not deter you from home educating your children. And, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank all the KZN JLC members who strongly opposed the province yesterday in that meeting, although we were shut down very abruptly. And also just to say thank you so much, Christopher, Karen, Uda, for being part and for creating this opportunity for us to engage with homeschool educators and for us to inform parents what is exactly going on. Thank you.
An absolute pleasure, Naresh, and thank you for taking the time. I know everyone came here kind of like dropping what they were doing, and I have to go back and pick up their day again. So thank you very much for doing that. Yeah, and let me make that point, I think, as well, that I mean, it's been a pleasure to help get the KZN JLC established. I also should maybe just say thanks to Marinda Irwi, who is no longer as involved as she once was, but she was one of the pioneers of establishing the KZN Homeschool Association, and I think Karen and I went down to the inauguration. And so I think, this work it's many years work, like 6-7 years work that's finally bearing some fruit. But thank you for everyone who stood up so firmly. And this shows what happens. I don't think the department, when they deal with other stakeholders, get as much informed pushback to overreach than they do from homeschoolers. Dave, from your side?
No, just thank you for this meeting. And it's unfortunate that the statements were made, and it's also a little bit unfortunate that we have to take this message to the groups, because it does create a little bit of panic. But as Naresh said, we shouldn't panic. We should just keep on doing what we're doing and let the trust and all the other authorities just deal with the issue. Otherwise, it's just going to create massive panic, because the comment did create quite a spark. Thank you.
No, thank you, and thanks specifically, Dave, because I know you've also got other work commitments, and you've already spent kind of 2 days dealing with this. So thank you very much for your help, and thanks to your wife who plays an important role taking the fight forward as the chairperson of the KZN Homeschool Association. So please give her our love and thanks for everything that she does, and to your family, because it always is time away from family, no matter how you cut the cookie. That's how it ends up. I'm not going to ask Uda for comment, because Uda said if her camera goes off, it means something serious is going on at her home. So either the house is burning down or pineapples are being sliced with ninja knives or something. So Uda, thanks for being here. I know this is probably longer than the kids anticipated, but thank you. Karen, last comment from you.
Just want to encourage homeschoolers to educate themselves on what the law actually says. So that's the one thing. If you know what the law says, you are very well armored. And then the other thing is focus on your child and don't let yourself be put off. You are on a good journey. You are doing something that there are thousands of children out there who are not receiving an education. So you are actually doing a good thing. So don't feel like like you need to be in jail.
Correct. Yeah. No, you're not the pariah. You're the person who's taking the extra effort, and it's unfortunate that because you're doing that, you're kind of a tall tree that catches the wind. But that's also why the trust is here to help you. So yeah, both in educating people about what the law is, which hopefully this session will do. Thank you to everyone again for the time. Thank you to everyone who's going to listen up to this point. It's been a long session, but there's a lot to cover. And then let me just ask everyone, please share this video, like this video, please. That helps us with the algorithm on YouTube. Please hit the notify bell so that you get notified of videos like this. I think we are gonna be doing more of these because of the need to communicate quickly with everyone. And then yes, and so we'd love you please to notify as well. So like, share, and also hit the notification button. And very importantly, subscribe to the channel. We'd like to hit 1,000 subscribers, because that also pushes the algorithm. So please subscribe. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching this up to this point. And you'll definitely see more of these. And the more you watch, the shorter they will become, because we'll do more of them, and we won't have to cover everything in such length. But thank you, and thanks once again to everyone in the KZN JLC who's sort of fighting the good fight in I think the province that we always anticipated would be the problem province. But you're very well, but your province is very well represented by everyone on the JLC who are real champions. So thank you, everyone. So thanks and goodbye from me.